Earth didn't die slowly. It wasn't the slow decay we feared, not climate change, not resource exhaustion, not even the wars we always worried about. It was swift, brutal, and merciless. The veil came without warning, descending upon our solar system like a dark tide. I was on Luna at the time, overseeing propulsion tests for the Artemis, an experimental exploration vessel designed to push humanity beyond the confines of our star system. The ship was my pride and joy, a symbol of hope that one day we might venture into the unknown and stake a claim among the stars. Ironically, it became our lifeboat in the face of annihilation. I remember standing in the observation dome of the lunar research base when the attack began. Earth was a jewel, radiant and vibrant, framed by the stark blackness of space. Then the Veil ships appeared, massive and angular, blotting out the stars. The initial blasts were so powerful that they registered seismic activity even on Luna. Explosions rippled across Earth's surface, visible even from our vantage point. Cities turned to ash in seconds. The blue of the oceans reflected orange and red as firestorms consumed the land. Chaos erupted on Luna. The base was a flurry of activity as personnel scrambled to evacuate. I tried to reach anyone on Earth, but the communications channels were flooded with screams and static. The orbital defense platforms fired everything they had, but their weapons were useless against the Veil's energy shields. I watched as the mighty fleets of Earth, the culmination of decades of technological advancement, were obliterated in minutes. We received the order to launch the Artemis. It wasn't ready. The warp drive had only undergone limited testing, and the life support systems were designed for a small crew, not thousands of refugees. But there was no other choice. The Veil ships were turning their weapons toward Luna. The base commander made the call load everyone we could and launch immediately. The Artemis was never meant to be a warship. It was sleek and fast, built for exploration, not survival. But in those frantic moments, it became our only hope. Soldiers and engineers worked together, cramming as many people aboard as possible. Families were separated, friends torn apart. I don't even remember boarding the ship, I just remember the hollow look in the commander's eyes as he stayed behind to buy us a few more minutes. We launched as the Veil's weapons fired on Luna. The blast was blinding, even from the safety of the Artemis. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't block out the screams from those who didn't make it on board. The moon was gone, reduced to rubble, and Earth followed shortly after. I forced myself to look back one last time. My home, my planet, was shrouded in fire and smoke, breaking apart under the Veil's relentless assault. That was the moment it hit me we were alone now. 10,000 souls aboard an untested ship, adrift in the void, with no home to return to. Earth, the cradle of humanity, was gone, and with it, everything that defined who we were. The Artemis drifted in the silence of deep space, a fragile sanctuary amid the infinite void. None of us knew what to do next. The ship was designed for exploration, not survival. Every system on board, from life support to propulsion, had been pushed past its limits. The air was thick with tension as we floated through the aftermath, carrying the last remnants of humanity into the unknown. Our first priority was survival. The ship's onboard AI, Helios, took stock of our situation. It calculated our resources. With cold efficiency, we had food for 1 year, water recycling systems that could last longer if properly maintained, and an experimental warp drive capable of taking us farther than any human had ever traveled before. The problem was we had no destination. The bridge became a hub of desperate conversations and frantic decision-making. I wasn't supposed to be there. An engineer was needed in the lower decks, but leadership was a void no one wanted to fill. Somehow I was dragged into it. Maybe it was because I had worked on the Artemis for years and knew her systems better than anyone. Maybe it was because I was one of the few who hadn't completely fallen apart. Either way, people started looking to me for answers. The warp drive was our one advantage, but it was a gamble. We had tested it on short-range jumps between planetary bodies, but long-distance use was uncharted territory. Each jump required precise calculations, or we risked materializing inside a star or tearing the ship apart. Helios suggested a series of short jumps, probing deeper into uncharted space. It wasn't ideal, but it was all we had. The first jump was terrifying. As the drive powered up, the entire ship seemed to groan under the strain. Lights flickered, and a low hum reverberated through the corridors. When we emerged on the other side, there was a moment of silence before the cheers erupted. We were alive, and the ship had held together. It felt like a small victory, though none of us dared to celebrate too much. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair minor damage caused by the jump. Scientists analyzed every piece of data we collected, searching for any hint of a habitable world or a sign of other survivors. Soldiers patrolled the ship, their presence a reminder of the Veil's lingering threat. People clung to routine as best they could. The cafeteria became a place for whispered conversations and stolen moments of normalcy. Children, a handful who had been evacuated from lunar settlements, played quietly in corners, their laughter a bittersweet echo of what we had lost. Then came the signal. At first, it was faint, a barely perceptible blip on the sensors. It didn't match anything in our databases, and it wasn't Veil. The bridge crew debated whether to investigate. Some argued it was a trap, others saw it as a chance for hope. In the end, hope won. Helios recalculated the ship's trajectory, and we prepared for another jump. The unknown lay ahead, but it was better than the emptiness we left behind. As the warp drive powered up again, I felt the weight of our choices pressing down on me. We had no guarantees, no safety nets, but we had each other, and for now, that would have to be enough. The signal was faint but unmistakably artificial. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, a pattern too deliberate to be natural. It wasn't human, at least, not anything from Earth. That much was certain, yet it wasn't Veil either, and that alone was enough to make us gamble on it. In the cold void, hope is a precious thing, and this signal felt like hope, no matter how fragile or distant. The bridge was a flurry of activity as the signal grew stronger. Helios pinpointed its origin, a system near a dying star, its light dim and flickering in the vastness of space. Orbiting the star was a structure, massive and alien, spinning lazily like a forgotten relic. From our vantage, it looked like a derelict station, its darkened hull pocked with the scars of time and neglect. It was ancient, far older than anything humanity had ever encountered, and its size dwarfed the Artemis. The closer we got, the stronger the unease grew. The structure's design was strange, flowing, and organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Its material defied analysis, resisting every sensor scan we attempted. It was a ghost in the void, silent except for the pulse of its signal. We debated what to do. Some argued we should leave immediately, that whatever sent the signal might return. Others, desperate for answers or resources, pushed to investigate. As usual, the decision fell to me. I didn't feel ready for the responsibility, but there was no one else to take it. And so, with my gut churning, I gave the order to approach. Docking with the station was an exercise in caution. The Artemis maneuvered carefully, aligning with what appeared to be an airlock. The structure's mechanisms were dormant, and the docking clamps groaned as we forced a connection. A team of soldiers, engineers, and scientists suited up, myself among them, and prepared to step into the unknown. The interior of the station was eerie, its corridors bathed in an unnatural light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The architecture was alien, its surfaces covered in intricate patterns that shimmered and shifted when touched. The air was thin but breathable, filled with the faint scent of ozone and something metallic. As we ventured deeper, we found remnants of its creator's decayed skeletons scattered in clusters. They were unlike anything we'd seen before, their forms elongated and delicate, as though built for a lower gravity environment. Their tools and artifacts were scattered around them, untouched for what seemed like millennia. It was clear that whatever had built this place was long gone. In the heart of the station, we found the source of the signal. A glowing orb, suspended in midair, pulsed gently, projecting symbols and data in patterns we couldn't comprehend. Helios worked to translate, deciphering fragments of information. The message it carried was both a warning and a record. The Veil, it seemed, had destroyed this civilization just as they had destroyed Earth. The station's creators had fought valiantly but had ultimately been overrun. Before their extinction, they had encoded their knowledge into the orb, leaving it as a beacon for others to find. The data pointed to a region of space, a distant star cluster where the Veil had not yet reached. A refuge, perhaps, or a battlefield. It wasn't clear, but it was the only lead we had. We downloaded everything we could, leaving the orb intact in case others might one day follow our path. As we returned to the Artemis, the weight of what we'd learned settled heavily on all of us. The Veil were relentless, unstoppable. But we now had a destination, a place to aim for in the vast emptiness of space. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, in the face of despair, something is all you need. The path to the star cluster wasn't straightforward. The Veil's presence extended far beyond what we had initially feared. Their patrols prowled the edges of systems like predators, their massive ships blotting out stars as they passed. The Artemis was no match for them in open combat. We had to rely on stealth and cunning, slipping through the cracks of their surveillance. It felt like navigating a minefield in the dark, with every step a potential end to humanity's fragile survival. Helios became our guide and our lifeline. The AI processed enormous amounts of data, plotting courses that skirted known Veil activity while calculating warp trajectories to minimize detection risk. Even so, there were close calls. One encounter stands out vividly in my memory. We had just dropped out of warp to recalibrate the drive when the sensors lit up with proximity alerts. A Veil cruiser had emerged on the far edge of the system, its sleek, angular form gliding through the void like a shark in open water. It was hunting, and its path would intersect with ours in minutes. Panic rippled through the ship. Soldiers scrambled to battle stations, their faces pale despite the grim resolve in their eyes. Engineers worked frantically to mask our energy signature, rerouting power away from non-essential systems to dampen our presence. Helios suggested a risky maneuver, using the gravitational pull of a nearby gas giant to slingshot us out of range before activating the warp drive. The maneuver was terrifying. The Artemis groaned under the strain as we dove toward the gas giant, its massive form dominating the viewport. The ship shuddered violently as its engines strained to compensate for the gravitational forces. Alarms blared, and for a moment, I thought we wouldn't make it. But then, with a jolt that sent us all reeling, the warp drive engaged, hurling us into the safety of the unknown. Every close call like that took its toll. Morale aboard the Artemis was a fragile thing, and fear was a constant companion. Arguments broke out over the smallest issues: ration allocation, sleeping arrangements, even the temperature of shared living spaces. People were scared, and fear made them unpredictable. Despite the tensions, a sense of purpose began to take root. The knowledge we'd gained from the alien station gave us a destination, and for many, that was enough to keep going. Scientists worked tirelessly to analyze the data, unraveling the fragments of the alien language and piecing together a clearer picture of the star cluster we were heading toward. Engineers modified the ship wherever possible, squeezing every ounce of efficiency from its systems to extend our dwindling resources. There were moments of humanity amid the struggle. I remember walking through the corridors and hearing someone playing a guitar, a simple, haunting melody that carried through the silence like a reminder of Earth. Families huddled together, parents telling stories of home to their children, trying to preserve memories of a world that no longer existed. The journey felt endless, each warp jump dragging us farther from everything we'd known and deeper into the unknown. Yet with every light year we crossed, the promise of the star cluster grew closer. It was hope, distant but real, pulling us forward. We were no longer the people who had fled Earth in a blind panic. We were survivors, tempered by loss but unbroken. Each day was a battle against despair, against the oppressive weight of what we'd lost and what still lay ahead. But we pressed on, because stopping meant death, and humanity was not ready to die. The closer we got to the star cluster, the more the alien data we'd recovered began to make sense. It wasn't just a refuge, it was a rallying point. The station's creators, in their final moments, had sent out their knowledge not just as a warning but as a beacon for others who might resist the veil. The cluster was dotted with potential habitable worlds, and more importantly, remnants of an alliance and ancient coalition of civilizations that had once stood against the veil. Helios continued to translate fragments of the data, revealing names of systems, coordinates for forgotten strongholds, and hints of technologies far beyond what humanity had ever developed. The thought of finding allies, or even weapons strong enough to fight the veil, rekindled a cautious optimism among the crew. But it was a fragile hope, and our path remained perilous. As we approached the outer edges of the cluster, we encountered the first sign that we were not alone. A ship, ancient and battered, drifted near a small, dying star. Its design was unlike anything we'd seen, its hull an amalgamation of patchwork repairs and unfamiliar materials. It was clearly not Veil, but it wasn't human either. Against my better judgment, we decided to investigate. We sent a boarding team, heavily armed but cautious. The ship's interior was a labyrinth of dim corridors and eerie silence. Signs of a fierce battle were everywhere: scorched walls, shattered control panels, and the remains of its crew, alien skeletons frozen in grotesque positions of final resistance. The air was thin, stale, and filled with a faint hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. In the ship's central chamber, we found what appeared to be its heart, a massive crystalline core that pulsed faintly with light. It was some kind of power source, far beyond anything humanity could produce. Helios interfaced with the core, pulling fragments of data from its memory banks. What we uncovered was chilling. The ship had been fleeing the Veil, much like we were. Its crew had been part of a resistance force based in the cluster, using advanced technology and guerrilla tactics to strike at the Veil's supply lines. But the Veil had found them, overwhelming their defenses and scattering what remained of their fleet. This ship was one of the last survivors, its core damaged in the attack, leaving it adrift and powerless. The data confirmed what we feared: the Veil was already moving toward the cluster. They hadn't fully arrived, but their scouts were probing its boundaries, searching for stragglers like us. The star cluster was no sanctuary, it was a battlefield waiting to ignite. We salvaged what we could from the ship: fragments of its power core, weapons that might be modified to work with our systems, and a map showing key locations within the cluster. Among the items retrieved was a recorded message from the ship's captain, a desperate plea for unity among the cluster's remaining inhabitants. As we returned to the Artemis, the weight of what we'd learned bore down on us. The cluster wasn't just a destination, it was a challenge. If we wanted to survive, if we wanted to ensure humanity had a future, we would have to do more than hide. We would have to fight. The crew felt the shift in purpose. Fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of every thought, but it was joined by a grim determination. For the first time since leaving Earth, we weren't just running. We were preparing for the inevitable. The Veil was coming, and we had to be ready. The star cluster unfolded before us, a sprawling tapestry of celestial beauty and desolation. There were stars of every hue: blazing blue giants, smoldering red dwarfs, and quiet white remnants of long-dead suns. Scattered among them were planets, some cloaked in swirling clouds, others barren and scarred, each a potential lifeline or a stark reminder of what we had lost. Yet for all its vastness, the cluster felt strangely empty. There were no bustling worlds or thriving civilizations, only ruins and silence. Our first stop was a world the alien data had marked as a former stronghold. From orbit, it looked promising: lush greenery stretched across its surface, and vast oceans glittered under the light of its twin suns. But as we descended, it became clear that something was wrong. The structures we found were colossal and decayed, their alien designs unlike anything built by human hands. They were overgrown with vegetation, their technology lifeless and inert. Whatever civilization had once thrived here was long gone, wiped out by time or the Veil. We scavenged what we could, carefully entering crumbling buildings and ancient facilities. The artifacts we recovered hinted at advanced technology, but most of it was beyond our understanding. The ruins were eerily quiet, as though the planet itself mourned its lost inhabitants. Among the debris, We found remnants of writings, glyphs, and carvings that Helios analyzed tirelessly. The translations were partial, but they spoke of desperate battles and an alliance shattered under the weight of the Veil's onslaught. It was hard to shake the sense of foreboding as we left the planet. It was clear that the cluster's former inhabitants had tried to fight back, but their efforts had ended in failure. What hope did humanity have against such an unstoppable force? The question lingered unspoken in the air, but its shadow hung over all of us. Our next destination was a derelict space station, floating silently near a blue star. The station was massive, its design a stark contrast to the organic curves of the structures we'd seen on the planet. It was built for war, with heavy armor plating and weapons that looked formidable even in their dormant state. Helios detected faint power readings, suggesting there was still some life left in its systems. We boarded the station cautiously, wary of traps or Veil remnants. Inside, it was a maze of corridors and control rooms, filled with the detritus of a long-dead crew. The atmosphere was thin and frigid, and the faint hum of machinery was the only sound. In one of the station's control hubs, we found the remains of its final defenders, alien skeletons clad in intricate armor, their weapons clutched tightly in skeletal hands. The station's mainframe, though damaged, still held valuable data. It detailed the cluster's fall in harrowing detail, how the Veil had systematically dismantled the resistance, outmaneuvering and outgunning them at every turn. But it also contained schematics for weapons and ships, advanced designs that could turn the tide if we could adapt them to our technology. We spent days working to extract and integrate the information. Engineers and scientists pored over the schematics, their excitement tempered by the enormity of the task. We didn't have the resources to build these weapons outright, but we could use the knowledge to improve the Artemis and prepare for the battles ahead. As we prepared to leave the station, Helios picked up a faint energy signature of Veil scout ship entering the system. The Veil had found us. The realization sent a chill through the crew, but there was no time for panic. We had to act quickly. The Artemis powered up, and we slipped away before the Veil could detect us fully. It was a narrow escape, but it drove home the reality of our situation. The cluster wasn't just a refuge or a battlefield, it was a place of reckoning. We had to move quickly, gather what we could, and prepare for the fight of our lives. For the first time, there was a spark of something new aboard the Artemis, a glimmer of defiance. We were no longer just survivors. We were becoming something more, humanity's last, desperate hope. The Veil were closing in. We could feel it in every calculated breath, in every flicker of the sensors as they searched the cluster for us. The Artemis was pushing its limits, its engines strained from warp jump after warp jump, each more taxing than the last. The ship groaned under the pressure, the walls whispering in protest as we continued our relentless pursuit of the remaining strongholds within the cluster. Helios had pinpointed another world, a barren, rocky planet near the cluster's edge. Its surface was scarred by ancient warfare, littered with craters and blasted terrain. It didn't seem like much at first, no lush greenery, no hospitable atmosphere, but the readings from the planet's surface told a different story. Beneath its rocky crust lay a network of underground bunkers and vaults, remnants of another forgotten civilization. The data suggested that these vaults contained weapons, technology that might give us the advantage we so desperately needed. But it came with a warning: the planet had been a site of fierce conflict, and it was unclear whether the vaults were still intact or if they had been looted long ago. Despite the risks, we had no choice. The planet was the best lead we had left, and time was running out. As we descended into the atmosphere, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This was no longer a simple search for survival, it was a mission to reclaim what was lost, to strike back against the Veil, and to ensure humanity's future. The crew understood this, their faces set with grim determination as we prepared for whatever lay ahead. The landscape below was unforgiving, jagged mountains and vast deserts stretching as far as the eye could see. Our landing site was a massive canyon, the entrance to the underground vaults hidden deep within its depths. We descended in silence, the ship's landing gear crunching against the rocky surface as we touched down. I led a team of soldiers, Engineers and scientists through the rugged canyon, our path illuminated by the faint glow of our helmets. The deeper we went, the colder and darker it became. The air was thin and stale, and the walls of the canyon pressed in on us. It felt like a tomb long abandoned and forgotten, but Helios readings remained steady, confirming that the vaults were nearby. We found the entrance after hours of trekking, a hidden hatch camouflaged by debris and time. It was ancient, its metal surface corroded, but it held firm. We worked quickly, using tools scavenged from the Artemis to pry it open. Inside, we found the vaults a sprawling complex of corridors and storage rooms, many of them untouched by time. What we discovered in those vaults was nothing short of extraordinary. Weapons that defied comprehension, ships in various stages of disrepair, and technology so advanced that it seemed to bend the very laws of physics. There were also records detailed accounts of the cluster's former inhabitants and their war against the Veil. It was a history of sacrifice and bravery, but also of desperation. They had fought for generations, but the Veil's overwhelming force had eventually torn them apart. We spent days scouring the vaults, retrieving everything we could. The weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen: energy-based firearms that could rip through armor plating that adapted to its user, and energy shields that could withstand blows that would have destroyed the Artemis in an instant. It was enough to level the playing field, but the cost was clear. The technology came with a price. The vaults were riddled with traps, automated defense systems that we had to disable or bypass. More than one member of the team was injured, their wounds a painful reminder of the dangers we faced. As we returned to the Artemis, our haul of technology and weapons in tow, I knew we had made a significant step forward. But the Veil were still coming. Their forces were growing stronger, and they were relentless in their pursuit. We had the tools to fight back, but the real challenge lay in how we would use them. The galaxy had been ravaged by their cruelty, and now it was our turn to show them what humanity was truly capable of. The war was just beginning, and we were no longer running. We were ready to fight, to reclaim our place in the stars. The Veil would soon learn the true cost of underestimating the last survivors of Earth.